Welcome everyone, welcome to this webinar about grassland as carbon sinks. This is a partner event of the EU Green Week 2022. Welcome, thank you for joining us today. I will give a few more minutes for the remaining participants to log in and join us. In the meantime, if you're feeling comfortable with this, I would invite you to introduce yourself in the chat, giving your name and the organization or the project you belong to, so that we get to know a little bit who is in the room with us today. And we would also love to read what brings you here today. So tell us, why are you interested in the topic of carbon farming and grass-based business models as part of the EU Green Deal? So take a moment, you can write in the chat and introduce yourself and explain your interests in this webinar today. For those who are joining us just now, welcome. Thank you for coming to this webinar about grassland as carbon sinks. This event is a partner event of the EU Green Week 2022. This year, the EU Green Week is focusing on the EU Green Deal and in particular, three important transformative pillars of the EU Green Deal, which are zero pollution, biodiversity, and circular economy. All three will be very important to the discussions we are having today. My name is Clara Boissin. I will be your moderator today. I come from Prospects Institute in Brussels, and I am a partner of the Horizon 2020 Go Grass project. I am in charge of stakeholder and consumer engagements in this project. This webinar is organized by Go Grass at the initiative of our partners Greenovate Europe and the Leibniz Institute for Agricultural Engineering and Bioeconomy, also known as ATB. While we wait for the last participants to join, allow me to give you a very brief introduction to the Horizon 2020 Go Grass project. There you go. So everything started from the observation that 28% of the EU surface is covered in grasslands and shrubs, which are currently not put to that much use. With this project, we started in 2019 exploring the potential of grassland to develop new grass-based products and value chains. So what are our objectives in Go Grass? Our objectives are, on the one hand, to contribute to the development of European bio-based economies, but also to help reduce dependence on imports, especially for nutrients and for fossil fuels. And we also aim to support the economic, environmental, and social development of rural communities. Now, to achieve this goal, Go Grass has 4 demo sites across Europe. There is one in Denmark, in Sweden, Germany, the Netherlands as well. Each of these demos is working on a different grass-based products and on different value chains as well, with the objective to develop local and replicable business models that add value to the local community where the value chain is taking place. Now, how does this link to what we will be discussing today, you might ask? Our partner Greenovate Europe, organizer of this event, is currently developing a white paper for grassland opportunities, which will evaluate the current status and needs for grassland use in Europe and identify policy frameworks, innovations, and opportunities for further valorization of European grasslands. One of these opportunities is carbon farming, which we will be discussing today. And as such, the conversations we will be having today will contribute to this white paper. So our objectives of the day, as you can see on screen, the first objective is to introduce you to some practices and resources that can foster the development of carbon farming in relation to sustainable grassland management practices, but also circular agri-food systems. You will hear more about this today. A second objective we have is to present some business models that are circular and grass-based, but also that have high replication potentials in relation to carbon removals. And our last objective as well, always in relation to this white paper I was mentioning just a couple of minutes ago, we also wish to identify policy barriers and potential solutions as well to improve the valorization of grassland in Europe. So let me just take you briefly through the agenda of the day. So we will start with two different presentations. The first one will focus on EU eco schemes as incentives for grassland agroecological practices with Maria Rosa Mosquera from the University of Santiago de Compostela. And then the second presentation will be with Uffe Jorgensen from Aarhus University in Denmark, which will focus this time on the different ecosystem services which can be provided by Grassland. There will then be a bit of time for Q&A, which will take place in writing. I will explain to you in a moment how we will do that. And after this Q&A, we will move into a panel discussion with two new speakers adding up to Rosa and Uffe. There will be Philip Grunman from ATB and Paul Newell Price from ADAS, who is also working on the Super G project. There will again be some time for Q&A with you if you have any questions for our panelists. And after this, we will slowly go towards wrapping up and conclusions. First, Natalie Bark from Greenovate Europe will tell you a little bit more about this white paper that I was mentioning. And after this, Violette Nukas, who is the project officer of GoGrass, will also take the floor. And finally, we will hear some concluding remarks from two of our ATB partners, Sonia Germer and Muluken Adam Seged. So that's it for the agenda of the day. Some rules. Oops, I'm going a little bit too fast with my slides. So some rules for the meeting that we are having just now. So you are welcome to use the chat to communicate among one another, to introduce yourself, to tell us why you're interested, to make comments. However, when it comes to questions you would like to ask, I would strongly invite you to use the Q&A tab, which you can see at the bottom of your screen at the moment. This is because the Q&A tab allows for speakers to answer your questions in writing, which means that if we are not able to pick up your question right away during the conversations, during the Q&A, then the speakers can still write an answer for you. This meeting will be recorded, and we will also share this on the GoGrass website and YouTube channel afterwards. You will also receive all webinar materials by email later. You are also free to communicate about this webinar and tag GoGrass with the different social media tags that you can see on screen right now. Now, without further ado, we will move right into our agenda for the day. So the first person who will be taking the floor today, our first speaker, is Maria Rosa Mosquera from the University Santiago de Compostela. So Maria Rosa, I will let you take the floor. I will let you share your screen as well. So could you tell us a little bit, how can EU eco schemes incentivize grassland agroecological practices? The floor is yours. I believe you're muted.
Sorry, yeah. Yes, I am muted, sorry. Can you see my screen already?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction and the presentation. I'm going to talk about the EU eco schemes, the new EU eco schemes from the CAP 2021 to 2027, trying to incentivize grassland agroecological practices. The first thing I want to highlight is the difference between the previous CAP and the current CAP, and what does eco schemes mean? Well, in the past CAP, we have the Pillar 1, which included the cross-compliance and the greening, and also rural development programs within the Pillar 2. And this has been respected, this Pillar 2, within the CAP 2021-2027, but the Pillar 1 has been modified by introducing a new enhancing conditionality with new indicators that we have to work with. They are not working yet because the strategic plans are still not being fully approved. And we have also the eco schemes, which are voluntary for farmers. And I will explain a bit what is it about and the relationship with the grasslands. Well, it's important to understand also that Pillar 1 pays 3 types of lands across the whole Europe. The permanent crops, orchards, vineyards, these kind of things, and also the arable lands and the permanent grasslands. And both arable lands and permanent grasslands, which are paid by the CAP, are linked to two types of grasslands, which are the temporary grassland included in the arable lands and the permanent grasslands included in the permanent grassland section, which are defined, among other things, to those grasslands that were not plugged for less than 5 years. Okay, these eco-schemes that are included within the CAP 2021-2027 are, there is a list that is not compulsory, provided by the European Commission, that includes a set of activities that are, or instruments that are already mentioned. And they should be used to fulfill the different areas of the environment, climate, and animal welfare actions under the CAP strategic plans. These type of areas are related with climate change mitigation, adaptation, protection and improvement of water quality, prevention of soil degradation, protection of biodiversity, actions for sustainable use and reduced use of pesticides, and actions to enhance animal welfare. All of them can be reached through the adequate use of grasslands, both temporary and permanent grasslands, the use in a sustainable way across all Europe, as grasslands represent the 50% of the agricultural land of Europe. Within this eco-scheme list provided the European Commission, we have the practices that are already established in the EU policy instruments, which are organic farming practices and integrated pest management. We can see here that what we did, the exercise that we did, was to analyze how these eco-schemes list or type of actions were fulfilled in the previous CAP, the CAP from 2014 up to 2020. So we can see that organic farming, which is in the list of the eco-schemes of the current CAP, are extensively used, but there are no other type of practices included within the eco-schemes list, like the ones that you can see there, rice, or practices and standards as set under organic farming rules that are not so related with grasslands. But the agroecological list of practices within the eco-schemes list includes two that are more relevant for grasslands. One is that's related with the temporary biodiversity, which are linked to temporary grasslands, crop rotation with legume plants, for example, winter soil cover, and catch crops above conditionality. That enhances the use of grasslands and recognizes the value of grasslands when they are intercropped with crops, as we will see afterwards. And the fourth type of practices within the agroecology eco-scheme list are the spatial biodiversity, where we can speak about mixed cropping, multi-cropping, cover crop between 3 rows of permanent crops, use of crops, plant varieties more resilient to climate change, and mixed species, diverse world, and permanent grassland for biodiversity purpose. With regard to the temporary biodiversity type of activities linked to the agroecology eco-scheme list, we make an analysis about where these annual crops are, just to understand how, if they rotate or not, if there is a real rotation, which is the real activity linked to the real agroecology activity, where are these annual crops? Well, we can see that in pink are the ones that no annual crops, or mostly not annual crops, and in different colors up to the blue, the heavy blue is the areas where we have more annual crops. But in general, we can see that that in the south of Europe and in the north of Europe, there are less annual crops than in the central of Europe. And this is important because we make another analysis, which is the evaluation between by using the LUCAS, the land use inventory that is based in more than 1 million sampling points across Europe, and is done carried out by the European Commission. We analyze what is the type of, in this case, of cereals. We should select cereals because it's one of the most relevant crops in Europe, and we see if these areas, these points that have cereals, how they change it 3 years after. We did the same exercise between 2012, 2015, and 2015, 2018. Well, we can see that in the Central Europe, where more arable lands have, we can see that there are changes to industrial crops. In some areas, there are changes to permanent crops, like here in the north of Italy. But in those areas with less annual crops, we can see that we have changes that goes to grassland. So there is a rotation, recognized a rotation there in UK and also in the north of Europe. So there is a change of rotation taking into account grassland in those areas where livestock systems that are that graze, that really do graze and are not indoors. They share and they exchange the grassland and cereals somehow, just recognizing the value of grasslands to the soil for the soil evolution. Here, in the analysis that we made about operations promoting rotation with legume, which is one of those cited in the agroecology eco scheme list, but promoted in the previous CAP 2014 and 2020, we can see that there are very few areas where this promotion of crop rotation with legumes can be found. Also, winter catch crops that used to use temporary grasslands in many areas of Europe are underrepresented. In pink, there are no measures that are promoting this, and in green, those areas where it is promoted nowadays. If we move and do the same similar exercise with spatial biodiversity, we made an analysis based also in the transects of Lucas about those areas that has a higher richness of polycultures in a spatial way. Well, we can see that they are more extended, and they are more in the north and in the south. That is not an activity that represents a higher proportion of the area, less than 10% in some regions and in some years. Here we can see the promotion of mixed culture and polyculture across Europe in the rural development programs between 2014-2020. And we can see that even if it is not very spread across Europe, there are a lot of measures that mentions that that mixed culture and polyculture is promoted. One of these mixed cropping is agroforestry, where you share in the same unit of land or or nearby forest areas or trees or woody perennials with like orchards, for example, with herbaceous vegetation that delivers agricultural products. We can see that there are several countries, mostly in the south, where this activity is promoted. Well, and just to end, as a conclusion, I would like to say that organic farming policy as part of agroecology is well represented in the CAP. Agroecology practices at land level can be identified with two main practices: crop rotation and crop diversification, where grassland has a strong role to play. Annual crops are mostly placed in Central Europe compared with the north and the south of Europe, while the two activities recognized as crop rotation, crop diversification by the agroecological eco scheme list, the crop rotation happens in those more diversified areas, recognizing the role of the mixed farming systems with both livestock systems and croplands share the territory. And crop diversification is mostly underrepresented in Europe, in spite of the greening promoted by the CAP 2021-2022 and the extended number of measures promoting it. And as recommendations, taking into account this eco scheme list that has to be fulfilled by the strategic plans for European member states, we make the recommendations to reach more sustainable grassland systems. We have the promise that there is a lack of clear definition of agroecology within the policy framework, and it makes difficult its implementation by member states, so this should be changed. Not only about the clear definition about the agroecology concept, but the clear definition of the agroecology practices is needed, including at least the crop rotation and crop diversification that looks like they are the most relevant ones. And both crop rotation and crop diversification, including grassland, are placed in areas that have both grasslands and cropland in a traditional way. So the farmers know how to combine and to change them even if we are speaking about crop rotation or crop diversification, which means that more innovations, development, and education is needed or are needed in the croplands and grasslands specialized areas within a defined advisory systems. Thank you very much. Hope to be on time.
You are perfectly on time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this enlightening presentation, which is opening the webinar we're having today. Before we move to Ufe's presentation, just a little reminder to participants, do not hesitate if you have questions to write them in the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of your screen, right next to the chat. This way, if we don't have time to pick up on the questions verbally, we can still write an answer to them directly in there. So while you're listening to Ufe, think of further questions you might have, and after that, we will have a moment with both Rosa and Ufe to answer your different questions. So thank you very much, Rosa. I would invite you to stop sharing your screen so that we can move to our next presentation, which will be with Ufe Jorgensen from Aarhus University, also a consortium member of GoGrass. So Ufe, you're going to talk a little bit about ecosystem services. How can grasslands contribute to a cleaner environment?
I will show myself, I hope now. Can you see?
Yes, we see you.
My screen, and yes. And I'm from a country with very little grassland. We have a lot of agricultural land. 61% of total land area is in agriculture. 80% of that is in annual crops and only 20% in perennial crops. So we can benefit quite a lot from the ecosystem services that grassland can provide. My first slide here tries to show that we need to be aware that grasslands can be very diverse. It can be temporary grasslands, very intensive cut grass, or it can be very extensive grasslands that have a lot of biodiversity, but maybe also on the cost of productivity. We have to not mix that up in the discussion. We have to know that this is very different. But I will start a little bit up the helicopter, talking about carbon. Photosynthesis is the most cost-effective and scalable process we have to create the negative emissions that IPCC has told us we need in order to meet the Paris Agreement. And therefore, we need to increase photosynthesis on our land as much as we can. Here's one of my PhD students looking into whether there are some varieties of miscanthus that are better than others. And this is possible to find. This is within a few percent increases that we often can find. I think that we have often forgotten to look at our total land use to see how efficient that is. And when we have 80% of our land in annual crops like we have in Denmark, much of the time, even during August and September, where this picture has been taken, we have non-green areas, which means no photosynthesis, and we lose a lot of opportunity for carbon capture and storage. And this is why there is a great opportunity to improve on this aspect. We have done experiments at Aarhus University since 2012, comparing range of different cropping systems. And as you can see here from this picture, I think from September, there's a lot of opportunities on the plate to choose from. Green crops, brown crops, or gray soil that has very different photosynthesis, but also different soil conditions and different processes going on with nitrate leaching, greenhouse gas emission, etc. And we're trying to to monitor that. A few results showing just some of the treatments shows that we are able to double productivity on the land compared to what is most usually a crop rotation like the one to the right, which is a grain crop rotation, also including rapeseed and wheat, which is typical for a Danish pig farmer. And there are some grasslands that has double productivity, and I should say the grain crops, the measurements of the grain crops are grained and stored together. So we can double productivity, and on the same land, looking at the other side of the coin, we can halve nitrate leaching. Maize is also a quite productive crop, not significantly different on crop production from the grassland, but nitrate leaching is much, much higher, and we can reduce more than half from the maize, but approximately half from the traditional crop rotation of grain crops and nitrate leaching. It's not only nitrate leaching that is greatly improved when we change from annual crops to even temporary grasslands. We have reduced soil erosion because the soil is covered year-round, and there's also a root system to take care of the soil. Total greenhouse gas emission is reduced, most usually in this range from 0.5 to 3.5 tons of CO2 equivalents per hectare under Danish conditions. This is a big range, which is because there's a lot of differences depending on which management you have on your field. Pesticide use is greatly reduced because most grass production doesn't take any pesticide use at all. There could be some pesticide use and on renewal of the grassland, but it's 40 to 50 times lower than in conventional grain crops. Biodiversity is increased even in these temporary grasslands. I'll come back on that. It's not red listed species you will find there, but there will be more usual species that have better conditions in a permanent crop than in a crop rotation. And then I think something which has been quite overlooked, often infiltration capacity for water is increased when you have a permanent crop. You have more macropores that can infiltrate the water, which is quite important when we have heavy rains that we will foresee being more common under the climate change. And the only problem we have now is that after being able to solve most of the agricultural environmental problems, what the heck should we do with all of that grass that we could produce? Because we cannot ask the farmers to produce more grass than they already do today for the cattle. We need a market for that production of the most environmental friendly crop you can produce under agricultural conditions. Therefore, we started looking into what contents of valuable constitutes there are in the different crops, and protein is quite an interesting component of green leaves and green crops. And we saw that the total crude protein yield was approximately double in the grass crops compared to the crop rotations. And therefore, we started looking into what could be done. This is a sketch of what we think is possible to make clean biorefineries that can be agents in the rural areas to create more crops, but also produce a lot of products, being food and feed, but also bioenergy and a range of chemicals that some of them we have earlier been producing from fossil oils in oil refineries, but could now be produced in green biorefineries. We started in pilot scale and had promising results, still not perfect results. We started doing experiments with feeding protein concentrate that we extracted from these green products. A concentrate that has a protein content similar or higher than the concentrate from soya. And we have had very nice results with feeding different types of animals. And as you can see, when it's for egg layers, you will see also an effect on the yolk color from feeding more grass-based food or feed to the animal. We've also done a desk analysis of the economy of establishing such biorefineries. I will not go into details, and this one is a few years old. So the framework conditions, as you know, are changing a lot at the moment. I think they are actually changing to the better because the product prices are increasing, and energy is not a big component of this. Of the cost, because most of it can be prepared within the biorefinery as biogas or something or similar. And it's showing that it seems to be a business case if you try to make an organic protein concentrate, which has a higher product price. It is still not a good business case in a conventional setting. And this is why there has been a commercial development trying to follow the organic production line. And we have now 2 commercial plants in Denmark. The second one is open to the right from our Minister of Agriculture and Fisheries. And everybody are happy. I hope they're still happy. They have, of course, their troubles in getting from research into commercial conditions. To the left, you see our demonstration plant, which is now supported from the Grass project to develop more results that can be used to support the commercial development of this new local product. It will be also more products, but we started with the soy substitute as the low-hanging fruit. I'll go back to the main topic and show a little bit of results on the biodiversity now in grasslands. And it's a very nice study here from Belgium that has had different types of cropping systems for 36 years. And then counting the number of earthworms in the fields, in the plots. And to the left, you see the number of earthworms in perennial grassland for 36 years. Then it's temporary grassland, and it's after 1 year, 1 year after establishing of the grassland, and 2 years after establishment of the temporary grassland, and the 3rd year after establishment. In the 3rd year of temporary grassland, the earthworm number is as high as in the perennial grassland. Then the temporary annual crops in between the temporary grassland has a very low level of earthworms, quite similar to the permanent agricultural, permanent annual cropping system. So there is a clear effect on earthworms from having a perennial system like grasslands that is not plowed annual. And you can see similar effects for many other animals and plants, but of course it's very different for different management systems. Then we have some results from our own experiments on the changes in soil carbon. I'm showing this graph, which is maybe a bit confusing, to show you that it's not so easy to measure changes in soil carbon in grasslands or in agricultural soils in general, because we are actually looking for a needle in a haystack. There is a quite large content of carbon already, and even though it is significant amounts that we are, which can be in the ton scale of carbon per hectare per year, it's quite a small amount compared to the background content. Here are some results after 5 years of different cropping systems, and we see a few significant effects, a reduction in soil carbon content in a continuous maize system, the first one here. And then there's also a significant reduction in an optimized crop rotation, all with annual crops. And then there's one of the permanent crops, tall fish, that showed a significant increase in soil carbon after 5 years. But what we did try to see if we could have some more clear effects was to pool all the annual crops and the perennial crops. And that gave us some very interesting results with significant effects in all the soil depths, 0 to 20, 20 to 50, and even in 50 to 100 centimeters. There was a significant difference between the development in the annual crop and the perennial grasslands. Highest effect in the topsoil, but even, as I said, in the lower soils, there is a significant effect. I think it's a good idea to not only look at the absolute impact of a perennial grassland on soil carbon, but to look at the difference between an annual and perennial crop, because the development depends a lot of what kind of soil is the starting point, and it will be best to look at the difference between the two systems. So I'll wrap up with some conclusions. I think that we can expand the area of grassland to deliver raw materials for biorefineries and also to produce new bio-based products at the same time as they deliver ecosystem services. And if we don't find this new market, I don't see how we can use these services to be more widespread. The thing is that the better solar radiation capture in grasslands compared to annual crops will increase soil carbon storage, have less nutrient losses and less pesticide use, increased biodiversity, and all of that will provide farmers license to produce, which is often a problem we see in Denmark, that we have severe problems in fulfilling the Water Framework Directive, and farmers may have to set aside significant amount of agricultural land if we don't find more smart solutions. And I think the grasslands in combination with green biorefineries is such a smart solution. Thank you. That was all.
Thank you very much, Uffe. So what I get also from what you say is that indeed there is a clear link between the ecosystem services that grassland can offer and the objectives of the Green Deal, whether we talk about the objective of going towards zero pollution, circular economy, or preserving biodiversity. So now that we heard already from two different speakers, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to put them forward. In the meantime, I have a few questions for you, Uffe, and for Rosa. So my first question is, in your opinion, for the both of you, what are the main obstacles that should be addressed to increase the potential of grassland as carbon sinks? And also, how do we overcome these obstacles? So maybe I will first give the floor to Rosa so that you can take your breath again, Uffe, and then we'll come back to you. I don't know if you have any issues unmuting yourself, maybe, Rosa.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Clara. No, I was saying that there is a question for me in the chat. I don't know if shall I answer that before or your question?
We'll come back to these questions in 2 seconds. I will take them all in one bulk. It will make it
Well, yeah, for me, it is clear. I mean, what the GoGrass is doing, I think, is the pathway to really improve and unlock the potential of grasslands across Europe. And the main reason of that is that, I mean, I think as UFE has demonstrated, there are many studies that demonstrates that grasslands has a huge amount of ecosystem services delivery potential and higher than arable crops. But the problem there is to develop adequate and more sustainable business plans and business environment. I think I would like to highlight the role of the business environment to move and to promote the use of this potential of the grasslands across Europe.
Thank you, Rosa. Uffe, how would you answer this question?
I would say it's shortly carbon credits, please. I think this is what the regulating bodies can provide.
Thank you. Very clear, straightforward answer. Another question I would also have, do the both of you know of any example, any best practice at a national or a local level as well to help increase the potential as carbon sinks of existing grasslands in Europe? Uffe, you already partially answered the question with your presentation on the Danish biorefinery.
Yes, but it's not only permanent grassland, it's also temporary grassland. I think we need to involve both of that, both of these groups. And I think, yes, the green biorefineries have been supported a lot from the Danish government, both in terms of framework conditions, but also with funding through research and development. So I think this has been a good cooperation between all stakeholders in this area. I would like to extend also my last answer with other ecosystem services, not only carbon, would be good to have it monitorized. Also things like nutrient losses, nitrate losses to the sea would help from being monitorized. Farmers act better if there's a economic value on their management. I know it's extremely difficult, but this is what we are lacking, that not only the products, the physical products, but also the ecosystem services are monitorized in a way that farmers can benefit, but also be punished if they are making it worse.
Thank you for your answer. Rosa, do you want to react to this, to complement? Do you have ideas of other best practices or example to put forward?
There are some examples good that are traditional in Spain, like for example the Dehesa systems, which is able this permanent grassland and the enrichment it produces on the soil carbon allows to have some productivity there in areas that otherwise would be like a desert. So there are good examples in Spain, and in there we have done some evaluations, and if you have a tree, you have 50 tons per hectare of carbon, but if you are far away from the tree, you have half of it, 25% of the carbon. So there are good examples of that, but the problem there is that the introduction of this carbon that is sequestered by the understory or by the herbaceous and the grasslands is not considered in the current carbon offsetting projects, which are the ones that are recognized by the IPCC linked to the carbon credits. One of the main problems that is mentioned we have is that there is not a clear way of measuring the carbon that is sequestered by year in a soil. It is established when you make the land change use from arable crops to more permanent grassland. And these are the most relevant ones. There are some activities, like for example, an operational group that was led by a certification company, trying to make it, but they did it with some arable crops, but not with permanent grasslands, including, of course, temporary grasslands.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And I still have one question from my side before I dive into the questions we're currently receiving from the participants. Do you see other potential carbon sinks that are related to the use of biomass from grasslands, but that are not necessarily directly related to the increase of soil organic carbon? So I have a bit an idea in mind here. I'm thinking about biochar as a possibility because they're being used for soil amendments. So they do come to a certain extent in a case like GoGrass in the German demo from grassland, but they are being used in croplands instead. What would you have to say about this? Maybe Uffe?
Yeah, I certainly recommend that as well, that biochar is an interesting option. You should consider a lot how to do it most smartly, because maybe you should use it for biogas first to have some of the easily available energy out of it, and then you could use the fiber fraction afterwards for biochar. But certainly biochar is something that can increase the stable carbon pool in the soil and also help provide negative emissions, certainly. I think if I can move on, we are also trying to develop products from the green biorefinery that could be plastics, that could be building materials. And if they have a long lifetime, which these things often have, they will also contribute negative emissions in other sectors.
Very good examples as well of new applications. Rosa, do you have a reaction?
For me, biochar is indeed one of the options that are good for increasing the role of carbon sequestration without taking into account the soil. And they, from a policy point of view, they have a very relevant importance, because in Japan, I know that in the last 2 years they included this biochar development as part of the carbon offsetting projects, which means that are recognized by the IPCC at least by one country. So this is a step which is very difficult to reach, but we have it already. So that is, I think, an excellent news. I fully agree with Uffe when he speaks about the use of the digestates when you produce bioenergy firstly, and use it use this residue as a subproduct, as a fertilizer, because we are running out of phosphorus, which is a strong problem, and the amount of greenhouse gases emissions that are needed to produce the nitrogen fertilizer is huge. So if we can reuse the grass in that direction as a fertilizer, that is also a great from my point of view, a great idea.
Thank you very much, Rosa. I will now move to the questions we're receiving from the audience. So there was one first that was directed directly to you, actually, Rosa, on your presentation in relation to the maps that you were showing. So it is said in this question, for Sweden, so it's divided into regions. There are differences in the way agriculture is being done across the country. Where did the sample take place in relation to the maps you presented? Was it in Laponia? Was it in the south? How many samples in each country? That was a question related to the data that you showed.
Yeah, it's well, the data is free available. It comes from Lucas. Lucas is an inventory system carried out by the European Union. They sample in a regular basis more than 1.3 million points that are done every 3 years. Well, last year was not done because of COVID situation, but it's done every 5 years, every 3 years. So you have this data available. There is no another type of database where you have the whole European Union cover set of data that can be used. But the reason behind we can do that they are not enough. Of course, 1.3 million is very costly, but it's the scale that they have used it, and I would like to have more samples, but it is too costly, let's say like this. So this is what we have. But the division of the figures by countries is in some countries and by regions in another countries, that I think the question is that, is because I try to relate the type of use of land in those regions with the rural development programs that are done as regions in one countries and as the whole country in another countries. We try to, we try to see the intensity of this sampling, and as I mentioned, I think they should be higher, but it is costly. And I think that there are two types of histories to come here. One is, okay, I want something very concrete. I sample it a lot, and I know a lot about this specific thing. But if I want to have a general overview, I have to reduce the number of points. But they give you an idea for further studies where you can divide the different areas of your region if you wish. But you have at least a comparison of the whole Europe, and a comparison also with the type of rural development measures that are implemented at the rural development program level. That could be at member state or at region level. Hope to have answered the question.
I believe this is answering the question very well. We have also another question, which I think is mostly directed to you, Uffe, around the scale of grass biorefinery. Which volume is needed to get a profitable production?
That's a good question. I don't think anybody knows exactly yet. The two commercial plants in Denmark have different scales. The first one, I think, will take grass from some 100 hectares of grassland, while the second one will take grass from some 1,000 hectares of grassland. I think the last one is probably the most profitable, but that depends a lot on how it's arranged and how the final technology will develop. I think we have to test it on the ground with farmers and blacksmiths to see how it works best and who will find the most smart solutions. But I think it, in any case, have to be quite decentralized, because we are harvesting wet grass with 80% of water, which you should not transport long. I used to say that maximum 10 kilometers, which is of course not definitive, but within 10 kilometers of distance to the plant is a good idea to limit it. And this means that the size of maybe a few thousand hectares is maybe the maximum in order not to have too much transport.
Thank you very much, Uffe. I still have two questions that are coming up, and then we will move into the panel discussion. The next one I have is the following. Given that the grassland is used for further production, would it actually be a carbon sink, providing negative emissions in the bigger picture? Or would the agricultural management and the following value chain processes outweigh that, in your opinion? Do you need me to repeat and rephrase the question a little bit?
Well, I think I may understand it, but it's also a complicated question. Yes, there are emissions from the following processes, but there are emissions from any food production that you can, of course, limit as much as possible. So therefore, it's impossible to fully answer the question. So there are much to do still on describing the full food chains, and of course the animal production is what causes the highest amounts of greenhouse gases in that chain. So in case you can make it directly into a food product, which we are also working on, it makes, of course, the less emissions during the whole food chain. I don't know if that was an answer.
I think that answers the question. I'm just looking at Rosa in case you want to complement. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say that I think to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from both from the land use and also from the value chain point of view, and also from the farm point of view, we have to take the whole set and see how to optimize the reduction of the greenhouse gases emissions. I think that a good idea would be this idea of the climate neutrality will help mostly for the value chain and mostly for the farm to reduce this type of inputs. With regard to grazing animals, I have to say that it depends. Okay, if we're speaking, I mean, most of the results that are against the use of animals because they increase the production of greenhouse gases emissions are based on a type of animal breeding that are related with indoor systems, where all feed is produced in Brazil, in Argentina, coming to the area, etc., 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 etc. But when we made, because we did this type of evaluations where we were speaking about the extensive grazing systems, the picture changed completely because all the carbon that is sequestered is consumed by the animals, and even you can use silage in the same farm, etc. The IPCC recognizes that the amount of nitrogen oxide that is emitted when an animal is in grassland compared with an indoors animal is 10 times lower. And on the other hand, there are another type of aspects that have not been taken into account when we speak about the grazing of animals. For example, in the south of Europe, if we don't have our large rangelands grazed, it means that they will be fired with very intense fires, like for example, those happening in 2016, where 100,000 hectares have been fired in 2 days. 100 people died because we don't have grazing. And the other, let's say that the way to solve it is to reduce the biomass you have there. That could be done in a mechanical way, but there is no money to do that because it's too expensive to do mechanical clearance of the grassland and on the rabbit vegetation, just to keep the land in a good situation to reduce the forest fire risk. So I guess it depends in the areas. I think the countries that have more intensive farming system based on indoors. I fully agree with the comment of Sufi. But in areas where we have extensive farming systems, they are a key part of the ecosystems to deliver ecosystem services, like, for example, biodiversity, like, for example, better infiltration, as mentioned, by better water retention and this type of thing. So, yeah, we have to be more concrete on what type of systems we are referring to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rosa. So I know there's still one question in the chat, but considering that the clock is running, I would suggest we move on to the panel discussion. Thank you very much, Rosa. Thank you very much, Ufa. We will welcome you back after the start of the panel for contributions to the discussion. For now, I would like to invite both Philip Grundmann and Paul Newell-Price to join us for the start of the panel discussion that we will have now. The first person who will take the floor, I will give both of you a little bit of time to introduce yourselves as well. But first, I will give the floor to Philip Grundmann from ATB, who is also the project leader of GoGrass. So, Philip, a question I would have for you as you're about to start your presentation: how circular grass-based business models are revitalizing rural areas in the EU? If you could tell us a little bit more about the benefits and what are the profitable solutions that GoGrass is actually putting on the table.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope you can hear me well now and also see actually my screen. So the question you just raised is very much related to this topic, and it is my pleasure to describe how the GoGrass project is actually creating and implementing grass-based circular business models, which also have a great potential to revitalize rural areas, but not only that, but also to remove carbon, which is somehow the topic of our event, or the big question of our event here today. Very shortly, so in GoGrass, we are particularly interested in valorizing surplus green fodder from the grassland and shrubland in Europe, which actually covers 21% of the surface. And then these new opportunities for the grassland valorization are of great interest to the rural communities, especially if they can make use of these available resources that would otherwise be wasted or unused. So this will allow new products and value chains to be developed while creating also new sources of income for the farmers. And there we are talking about revitalizing rural areas. So by improving the profitability of the green fodder production, the new developments that we propose can at the same time support sustainable use of grassland and also promote carbon storage in, for example, nature reserves, wetlands, or other marginal areas. The actually new businesses that are being developed in GoGrass include the demo that my colleague Uffe Bergensen already presented in Denmark, using a small-scale refinery for extracting the protein from the grass. And as he explained, this organic protein can then be fed to pigs, poultry, and dairy, with many additional benefits for the ecosystem, as already explained. Then there is a second demo in the Netherlands, which is about using the roadside grass to produce high-quality packaging and paper. The third demo is located in Sweden, and there colleagues from Rice and partners use reed canary grass for briquettes that can serve as animal bedding material with many beneficial properties. And after using this bedding material can be used as a fertilizer, or as well as for biogas and heat production. Now the last demo is in Germany, the fourth one, last but not least, and there it's about the conversion of low nutritional quality grass from wetlands of a national park actually into biochar, which is then or can then be used as a fertilizer or a soil amendment to, for example, enhance soil water retention capacity and nutrients holding capacity, as well as for carbon fixation. So the GoGrass concept shown here is about developing these businesses, but also scaling up the businesses at the local level, replicating the cases in other geographic areas, and ultimately creating additional benefits for the farmers and actors in the rural society and society in general, without competing with food and feed production. Now, in the next last part, I would shortly just explain how we assessed in a preliminary evaluation which of the four, let's say, common types of business models for carbon removal, which are shown here on the upper left side of my slides, how they could be most suitable for the demos in the GoGrass. And we are particularly interested in business models at farm level, I must say, and which are shown on the table on the right side. So the farm level model could be particularly suitable for the demos of biochar production, the animal bedding, and organic protein from grass. While the models outside the agro-food chain require already a certain scale of production, a much larger scale of production, which in our assessment could be the case of the demo producing paper and packaging material from roadside grass. As shown in the table below, all the demos have strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats with regards to implementing this carbon removal business models. The strengths revolve mainly around the important potential that exists, that is available, as well as this additional long-term benefits. But the weaknesses are related mainly to the lack of knowledge, the barriers for standardization, for standardized procedures, and the governance of the whole model, as well as the coordination. Well, opportunities are there, they exist, but also the threats are there, which I would shortly summarize mainly as related to uncertainties and some policy inconsistencies, especially for the local actors. As already Maria Rosa Mosquera mentioned, it's important to also have an eye on the business environments, not just what is happening in the businesses themselves. And to do that, we use a holistic approach and conducted a survey of 18 innovative grass-based businesses across Europe to see how supportive they are towards these businesses. And we looked at all the arenas shown here on the upper left side, from markets to funding, knowledge, etc. And we see that the sub-arenas which were mentioned by several cases to be not or less or low supportive include mainly training and education, market development, consumer awareness, rules and regulations, and funding. You can see this is a table from a publication of colleagues in the project. And these findings are very much in line with what we know from the literature about the causes which prevent, let's say, measures to improve carbon in the soil. Here in the lower left, for example, a publication from Demerer et al. In the bottom left, where the economic reasons and insufficient knowledge and restrictive policy have the highest percentages. So based on this, we formulated some necessary conditions for implementing carbon removal as a business model in GoGrass demos, including the generation, transfer, institutionalization of knowledge, which has to be accompanied by also capacity development at the local actors level, but also providing a holistic, stable, and motivational institutional setting for these innovative businesses, which have to integrate voluntary carbon removal practices together with other policy goals which exist as well, obviously. And last but not least, we think it's very important to build opportunities for local compensation programs, and maybe we can further discuss about this in the panel. And I would at this point thank you also on behalf of the GoGrass Consortium, and look forward to your ideas and questions. Back to you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Philip. Before we dive into the different exchange we will have in the panel, I would then give the floor to Paul Newell-Price, who is working on the Super-G project. Could you tell us a little bit more about what you're up to in the project, please?
Thanks, Clara. I'll just share my screen. Okay, you got the full screen there?
Yes.
Great, okay. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me to talk today about the Super-G project, which obviously has some similarities or relations with GoGrass. Full title of the project is Developing Sustainable Permanent Grassland Systems and Policies. We started in June 2018 and we go through to sort of February 2024. So I'll just give you an overview of the project and yeah, talk a little bit about sort of grassland as carbon sinks as well, mainly with a focus on permanent grassland. So in terms of the focus of this project, I mean, it's been said already what we mean by permanent grassland, but the focus is on what we call PG, land dominated by grasses or herbaceous forage that can be grazed or mown and has not been included in the crop rotation of a holding for 5 years or more. So as we've already sort of discussed, it sort of covers a whole range of situations. So it includes land that's under sort of grass and herbs with or without trees that may not have been cultivated for decades or more. But it also includes under that definition some sort of quite high output grassland, that might be renewed sort of every sort of 5 to 7 years, even every 3 years. So it does cover quite a large range of situations. Just a little bit of sort of background about permanent grasslands. You can see there on the map the sort of variation across Europe in terms of the proportion of the utilised agricultural area that is permanent grassland. So you see the main areas for PG there. Across Europe as a whole, we're talking about 34% of the utilised agricultural area, 21 to 24% within the European Union. And that area has generally been going down, reducing over the past sort of 30 to 40 years. There are a few exceptions, such as the Czech Republic and Hungary, where in the past sort of 30 years, the area of permanent grasslands has actually increased. But generally, there has been a reduction, hence the sort of EU policy to try and preserve permanent grassland and stop sort of reductions any further, so mainly due to the large amounts of carbon that permanent grasslands store. So just to give you a sort of bit of background about the Super-G project itself and sort of the overall aims and objectives in this project. It's a multi-actor project, so we're working with farmers, advisors, policymakers, civil society groups. And within the project, we've also got natural scientists, social scientists, economists. So it's a transdisciplinary approach we're taking. And we're looking to really sort of better understand the importance and functioning of PG within a range of European biogeographic regions and farming systems. I'll say a bit more about that in a minute. So what sort of state is the permanent grassland in? How is it performing in terms of the delivery of different ecosystem services? We're benchmarking and testing, so we've got trials, experiments, demonstrations across Europe within farm networks to see how the permanent grassland is performing across the range of ecosystem services. And the idea is really with farmers, advisors, researchers to sort of co-develop integrated approaches for profitable and sustainable PG management. So it's coming to some sort of consensus in terms of what we mean by sustainable permanent grassland management and what it looks like. We're also developing a sort of farm tool and a policy tool. So that's looking to help farmers demonstrate how they are delivering across the ecosystem services. And then with a policy tool, helping policymakers see how sort of changes in the area of permanent grassland and how it's managed can affect the delivery of ecosystem services at sort of regional to sort of European scale. So those are the sort of main objectives. In terms of the geographical range across the biogeographic regions, yes, we're covering sort of 6 of those. So we've got 22 partners stretching from the Mediterranean region up to the Boreal region, and also sort of Atlantic across to Pannonian region. So covering the regions with a sort of good selection of countries involved to represent those regions. I talked about sort of performance of the permanent grassland in terms of different ecosystem services that they provide. This slide just summarizes the ecosystem services that we're focusing on. So if I sort of just cover from clockwise from top left, the first one is the ability of permanent grassland to support biodiversity and the pollination service. So in terms of biodiversity, we're looking sort of below ground and above ground plants, birds, so quite an extensive range of biodiversity covered there. So thinking about the types of management that really promote biodiversity and the pollination service. Moving along then to the farmyard manure midden, which is there to represent sort of carbon sequestration. So we're looking at the service, the climate regulation service, so not only carbon storage and sequestration, but also limiting greenhouse gas emissions from permanent grasslands. And then moving on to top right, looking at the importance of permanent grasslands for protecting water quality and providing clean water. And then bottom right, I suppose, is this kind of interface between sort of Go Grass and Super G in that permanent grasslands can also provide food and fiber. So not only meat and milk, but other products from grassland, which is a sort of rapidly developing area. And then on the bottom in the middle, we've got a picture there representing the sort of cultural values and recreational values provided by permanent grasslands. And within that space, we're sort of doing focus groups and surveys with citizens to see sort of how they value the countryside and the grassland within it. And then bottom left is the other service that we're focusing on, which is the ability of permanent grasslands to sort of regulate water flow, so reduce risk of flooding, and also reduce the risk of erosion, so across the different biogeographic regions. So having given you a sort of overview of the ecosystem service, I just want to focus back on the carbon story for a minute. This is a slide provided courtesy of Pete Smith from the University of Aberdeen, who's a Super G partner. And this is a slide which just represents the ability of permanent grasslands, particularly to sequester additional carbon. So we can talk about temporary grassland and also permanent grassland. The focus of this slide is on the permanent. So I think the first point to make really is that if we're talking about moving from some cropland to grassland, there can be initially a very rapid increase in soil carbon. So we've got on the y-axis total carbon percentage, and here we're focusing on the top 23 centimeters, but I think the point has already been made that carbon can be sequestered below that. And then on the x-axis, we've got the number of years in grass. So we've got a situation here where it's been an arable cultivated production for a number of years. As is the case for many arable soils, it's lost up to about 50% of its carbon. So if you put that land back into grassland, there can be a sort of very rapid increase in carbon initially, and that can persist for sort of 50 to 100 years before you reach a sort of new equilibrium. But for a lot of permanent grasslands, the levels of carbon are already quite high, so there's quite limited capacity to increase carbon further. So that's always sort of worth bearing in mind. There might be maybe some grasslands or permanent grasslands that are degraded where you can sequester some additional carbon, and potential to perhaps sequester carbon lower in the profile using different sort of management techniques or change the intensity of grazing or the type of grazing. But the potential to sequester large amounts is limited. So it's just worth bearing in mind this potential for grassland within arable rotations as compared to permanent grassland, where the potential to sequester additional carbon is perhaps limited. The potential for temporary grassland is probably somewhere between the two, in that you will sequester carbon during the temporary grass lay phase, and then you probably lose it again during the arable phase. So there might be potential to increase carbon slowly over time, or at least retain what you've got. So I think just to summarize in terms of the Super G project itself, we're looking to better understand the importance and functioning of PG, and we're quite a long way along the journey to be able to do that. By working with farmers, we're sort of increasing the availability and uptake of PG management options and technologies that help in the sustainable management of those grasslands, improve the competitiveness of farming systems based on PG through improving or increasing their sustainability, and then also looking at agricultural policies that support the optimal or sustainable management of permanent grasslands. So that's it from me. Thanks for your attention, and look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much, Paul. So we can start now our panel debate. I would also invite Uffe and Rosa to come and join us on this occasion. I would have a few questions that I would like to pose. In the meantime, let me just remind participants If you have any questions for our panelists, please do not hesitate to post them directly in the Q&A tab, and then we will pick them up after the, let's say, bulk of the debate. So I will have a first question, which I would direct to you, Paul. So this is in relation to the relationship that could happen between the GoGrass solutions and the Super G initiative that you're working on. So one of the objectives that you have in Super G is the optimization of permanent grassland productivity, among other things, of course. But along these lines, and to also come back to what Uffe was saying earlier, once you have grass, what do you do with it? So you need to think also in terms of end use, you need to think in terms of customers. Now, Philip was already introducing a few different grass-based business models, products and value chains that could react to these sorts of needs in relation to the grass. Could you tell us a little bit for which areas in Europe do you foresee the greatest need or the greatest potential to replicate such business models? Do you think there would be an interest, maybe more for remote areas, maybe for more populated areas? Do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, no, it's a very interesting question. I mean, you talk about, there's plenty of grass out there. You need something, you need to use it. You need a customer. Well, there are quite a lot of customers out there already that are sort of purchasing sort of grass-based products, meat, milk, other dairy products. But I think it's correct to say that the level of grass utilization could be greatly improved, and that's where sort of, Super G project is working with farmers to improve that sort of level of grass utilization. So we can talk about it in sort of traditional terms, in terms of improving those systems. But we're also aware that there are certain parts of Europe where they still want to maintain and manage grasslands for all the ecosystem services that they provide. The carbon storage, the provision of biodiversity, but they don't necessarily have a growing or large market for dairy or meat products. And we had that instance with a webinar we had last month on how the national parks in Poland, for example, are managed. So they have sort of grass on peatlands, and they're very keen to sort of maintain that habitat, that land use within the national parks, but they don't necessarily have a large market for meat or dairy within that area. So they would be looking for alternatives to use that grass, and so the biorefinery concept or option has been mentioned. So it's a matter of sort of creating that infrastructure to make that happen. So yeah, I can certainly see it in some parts of maybe remoter areas, but even once the capacity has been built up, it could just be an option for grassland farmers in general to rather be producing for meat and milk, they're producing for a biorefinery.
Thank you very much, Paul. I would have a question for Philip, if I may. In your opinion, Philip, what do you think are the main policy obstacles that could prevent the EU from fully benefiting from the positive effects of the grass-based business models that are currently being developed, whether it's under GoGrass or under other initiatives? You're muted for now. Yes.
Let me see if I understood the question correctly. It was related in general to grass-based businesses, yeah, possible barriers, and maybe in particular also for this business of carbon sequestration. I would say it's particularly important to have like stable and reliable institutional settings, and let's say to set up, let's say, long-term monitoring and also the infrastructure for that. So that is probably something that can only be provided by the policy policy level. So what I see is a crucial factor is also the motivation and the coordination among the actors to implement these businesses and to develop the infrastructure, as Paul said, also, but also the capacity and the know-how how to make these businesses work. And that can be supported very much by a motivational framework from the policy side. So to things like enable the possibility of some blended funding, because funding was mentioned as within the business environment as a limitation. So blended funding in the sense that there could be public remunerations and rewards at the same time coming from the market or from private investors. I think the case that Uffe presented before in Denmark is a very good example how that works. Blended, how that can work. Blended funding and creating a motivational framework there. There are, I think, quite a number more of options that how policy could apply, and also the barriers. I think one very important barrier is simply the some of the uncertainty that the farmers face, and also the many different expectations and goals, policy goals that farmers have to fulfill. And now there's a new one coming up about carbon removal, and farmers really want to know, okay, will this be kind of part of payments through CAP, or are we really is there really some scope for entrepreneurial activities and additional revenues? Okay, I will leave it there, and hopefully we'll have more discussion on this point.
No worries, Philip. I'm also looking at Uffe and Rosa and Paul in case you also want to add something to this question. Let me just pause for a few seconds so that you can take the floor if you have something to add. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next.
Yeah, from my point of view, I think the way that is the CAP is thought, which is the CAP is the main driver of land management and use in Europe. It has to change because it is mostly based on territorial land, which is okay. It's arable land, permanent crops and permanent grassland, but it's very few related with the business environment and business development and this type of things. And it's not related at all with the carbon credits, the carbon offsetting projects, and so these things has to be changed to understand and to pay the ecosystem services that grassland deliver to foster the sustainability of use of agricultural lands in Europe, including, of course, the use of grasslands.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Uffe, Paul, anyone wants to react?
Can just back up. I think I can repeat myself and saying the same as Rosa. Monitoring ecosystem services is extremely important.
Thank you, Uffe. Paul? For some reason, we don't hear you, even though you are unmuted. Is there, maybe your microphone is not close enough to your mouth?
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. I was just thinking this question of certainty is absolutely critical for land managers, knowing what the policy landscape is, what the payments are, being able to plan for the future. Just out of interest, within the United Kingdom at the moment, we're sort of going on our own little pathway on agri-environment schemes, and within England there's a new sustainable farming incentive which is following similar lines, but really moving quite quickly down the route of sort of public money for public goods. So really only paying for the ecosystem services provided, and that's that's a certain route to take. And the one issue at the moment is this question of certainty. And the government have decided to use a sort of co-development approach, really, in that they're piloting the scheme with farmers, which is a good thing to do. But the downside of that is that it doesn't provide certainty in terms of what the final scheme will look like. So they're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place a little bit. So providing certainty as early as possible, I think, is crucial. And then, it's all the other things we talk about in terms of getting the capacity in place, getting the infrastructure in place, and the supply chain for any sort of new innovative ideas like biorefineries.
Thank you very much, Paul. I just remind everyone, if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to write them in the Q&A tab or in the chat, and we can pick them up in a moment. In the meantime, because I see we have no questions, because obviously you both gave a very clear presentations, I will move on to a few other questions that I have as well for you. One of them is actually related to what was mentioned just now, so this question of uncertainty. So one key element in relation to carbon farming, especially the certification schemes of carbon farming, is this idea of long-term, not to say permanent, but at least long-term storage of carbon. So which policies could be improved to help tackle this uncertainty, this need for a long-term change when it comes to grassland management and related grass-based business models? I'm first looking maybe at you, Philip, if you would have something to say to this. Otherwise, happy to let someone go first, and then we exchange the floors.
Yes, well, I would start answering with the point that Uffe made, that it's important to already take into account that the soils already are high in organic matter content, and but that there needs to be a constant effort, to keep that level high, and that there is a potential, and that this is something that will not provide a return in the short term. But at the same time, there should be if possible, some kind of payments which are, let's say, I mean, not to wait with some kind of payments until the results can be measured, but to provide some kind of remuneration or revenue scheme that is based on the expectation, and also on the fact that the farmers will need and will get a long-term guidance in this and support for at least 20 years. Maybe I'll just leave it there for the moment. I think there are probably more options how to deal with this long-term issue.
Thank you, Philip. So
basically, not just we cannot wait, let's say, 20 years or more until something is measured, but schemes need to allow for, in a way, of some kind of blended funding, I guess.
Thank you, Philip. So you're mentioning this idea that we need to act now. The results are going to come much later. How do we maybe incentivize at that point already, provide the guidance needed for farmers? I'm looking at Rosa. You're actually raising your hand. Perfect, because I was going to come to you on this question of incentives.
Yeah, for me, there are two key points that should be monitoring. First of all, the depth of the carbon storage, because there are areas where you can see how the carbon layer is growing. And it's more related with areas that have a higher biomass production, just because of the weather and so. And the other aspect is related with some techniques that allow you to measure not only the long-term carbon, but let's say the durability of the carbon. If it is linked to big fractions like sand, for example, then you know that this carbon is easy to be released if you plug, etc. But if it is linked to silt and clay fractions, we know that it lasts more and more time. So these should be two of the indicators that will take into account the accumulation of soil, of carbon in soil at a long term, the durability linked to different fractions, but also the capacity of the increasing the depth of the soil carbon layer.
Thank you very much. I see, Uffe, you were nodding. Do you want to add something?
Yes, please. I think the question of permanency is not that difficult as it might seem, because I think you might only count the years of grassland and relate the carbon storage and the carbon credits to that amount of years, because I've seen quite some studies showing that if you have only half the time of grassland, then you will have only half the amount of carbon compared to that upper level that you might get to, like Paul very nicely showed. So, but we need to know more about that, of course. But I think the first option that is possible is just to count the number of years with grassland, and then you can set your regulations for that.
Thank you very much, Uffe. And I'm looking at you, Paul, if you would like to react. And I'm also wondering if specifically you would have some thoughts in relation to how we can best guide, especially farmers or landowners, along this path towards, let's say, semi-permanent storage on grassland.
Yeah, no, I think I'd can you hear me okay? Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree with what's said. I think certainly with the case of if you're reverting to grassland and permanent grassland, then it's fairly clear the direction you're moving in, and there might be a need for sort of certain amount of sort of monitoring and verification and modeling, sort of backed up by that monitoring, and there might be some slight adjustments according to which soil type and climate you're in terms of how rapid that carbon is accumulated. But I think that's fairly easily done. It's more complex where, say, you're integrating grass within an arable rotation, or you are integrating sustainable soil management practices within a sort of arable or cultivated system, where there might be need for more sort of measurement, monitoring, and reporting. And that sort of measurement backing up any sort of modeling that links to payments. But yeah, again, the importance of long-term support for these schemes, point of having them for 5 or 10 years and then giving up, because those practices need to be sustained in the long term if that carbon is going to be protected. And in terms of advice to farmers, yeah, I mean, there's plenty of advice out there that we can provide in terms of the sustainable soil management practices that sort of sequester or protect carbon. But advice in terms of how farmers should currently exploit this opportunity, I think is quite complex, because there are quite a lot of options out there. It's a complex space. So some people are saying, yes, I mean, there are carbon credit schemes out there that you can join. Others are saying, hold on, because the market may change, and you don't want to sort of spend all your carbon credits. If you could potentially gain a lot more if you hold on for a few years.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I will actually take you to the word, because now we can wrap up the panel. For me, what I hear is that indeed everything related to valorization of grasslands and the question of using them as ecosystem services for carbon storage is complex. For me, that's the word that comes out of all the presentations and the discussions we've had today. I will now close the panel. Thank you to all 4 of you for taking the time to answer my many questions and to give presentations. And we will now move into the next point on our agenda. So we'll welcome Nathalie Barg from Greenovate Europe to take the floor. So Nathalie, you're currently working on a white paper around grassland valorization as part of the GoGrass project. Could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. So normally you can see my screen. Yeah. So thank you very much, Clara. Yes, in part of the GoGrass project, Greenovate Europe. So I'm working on Greenovate Europe, which is a network of sustainable. It's a network of organization supporting sustainable innovation. And we are involved in all the policy uptake activities, which means that we are really working on how to develop policy recommendation, policy measures, support action to really accompany and help a policymaker to improve the policies at different levels to, in the end, really support farmers to use grassland and grass as a resource for new business models. So for this white paper, it's planned within this project. And first, what is this white paper? What is its objective? What we want to do, so as I said, is to provide an overview of policy measures, support action, and key recommendation to support the implementation, adaptation, and replication of the GoGrass business models in various regions all over Europe. We will focus on the key obstacles and the relevant regulation to identify policy gaps and propose targeted policy solutions to support grassland valorization. This is really the key aspect on how really to valorize better through better policies of the grassland that is currently untapped potential and currently in Europe. So to go a little bit in details very quickly, we will, like with all we analyze today and what we hear from all the speakers, this is really befitting the white paper. The whole idea is really to see what is the current status, what are the needs regarding grassland valorization, what are the current challenges, and how the way we analyze and learn about these challenges and learning about the new policies at different level, how we can draft and propose new policy recommendations that are really adjusted to the different sectors, to the different groups of stakeholders, of industries. So we will analyze a lot. We will analyze how, why business environments are relevant. We already discussed this a lot during this webinar. We will also explore the grassland use. On this white paper, we are working, as I said, on all the challenges. They are environmental, technological, social, economic. And for that, we will use a lot the GoGrass finding and results that we are developing since 2019. Also, one of the key aspects is to identify the policy gaps. So we will do that through the looking to all the policy framework in Europe. So it will be about the European policies, but also national policies, and also the framework regarding regional and rural development policy. And the idea is to really propose practical solutions. So we will do that through working a lot on innovation and opportunities, reusing all the results from GoGrass, because GoGrass is really supporting the development of new products from grass and green fodders in all the 4 demo sites. So it means the animal feed, the nutrients, animal bedding, biochar, bioenergy, paper, and packaging, which are the products based on grass. We also explore how all the innovation related to grass-based soil carbon storage and sequestration, with all in line with all the new regulations about carbon farming. And then one of the key aspects, it's also the new value chain and the optimal scenario we are currently working on, how we can create a market for this grass-based product, or we can work on the business environment, the infrastructure, as it was mentioned, and the capacity building, the training, the knowledge transfer between regions, between farmers and business advisors and industry association, all the actors of the supply chain. So this will feed the policy recommendation. What will we do with this recommendation? So first, we'll have a validation webinar with policymakers in September. We will also publish a policy brief, which will be based on this white paper. It will be like a part of this white paper with all the analysis about the carbon farming and the practical, technical requirements and best practices. This white paper will be updated next year, depending on all the policy developments. And also we will present the lesson learned from GoGrass, and also introduce and discuss this policy recommendation during the final policy conference in next year. So, and we will present this recommendation to these different types of stakeholders, to the local authorities, to the European decision maker and regulators, to the Rural Development Agency, potential investors, also industry association, NGO, the farming sector and company, and also the research community, because we think this recommendation will really help them to design, co-create, and develop better policies for grassland valorization, and to really promote this grass-based business models. That's all on my side. Thank you very much. To you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Nathalie. So now that we have a better idea of what is the direction that we are taking with these different policy recommendations, I would actually like to give the floor to Pirette Noukas, who is the project officer of GoGrass. So Pirette, we would love to have a bit your opinion as well on how projects such as Super-G or GoGrass can contribute to the EU's objectives when it comes to carbon storage, when it comes to circular economy, the EU Green Deal in general. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon to everyone, and thank you. It has been already a really exciting discussion, so I think what I can only say here that, well, the European Research and Innovation work programs are set up with the policy objectives in mind. So it also means that the work that you're doing, it is relevant to the ongoing policies and on on the related to the policies in preparation. And you have gone in great details and also bringing out the shortcomings. So what I will now just relate to is maybe oversimplified, because it makes it look as it just gives you the bird's eye of the key policies as a summary, but it's the detail is are really on what you're doing, and also what I hopefully will come out from the policy white paper. And indeed, the projects, so how can research and innovations projects contribute? You do contribute already, and these are also great opportunities actually to test solutions, because besides research as Go Green Route, you have the testing side, the piloting opportunities. You do bring, we really encourage bringing in the stakeholders, so it means the users like the farmers, landowners, also the policymakers, so that you can get them, convince them locally, regionally, nationally, already bringing them on board even as partners in the project. So that all, I think, lays ground for the policy changes within these projects. But yet too quickly, and I start now actually in the presentation mode, sorry for this. I just bring up some of these key policies that clearly relate to the sustainable management of grasslands and the new business models that you're also showcasing and developing in GoGrass. Closest to my heart, coming from the Research Executive Agency's department that deals a lot with biodiversity and nature-based solutions, is the EU biodiversity strategy, which asks for the protection of nature, restoring of nature, and also enabling transformative change. And that we also see this collaboration with the farming sector, trying to find new business models, create the change in the business environment. And of course, I think everyone's waiting now for the new nature restoration law, which, as asked in the biodiversity strategy, is to develop an EU-wide methodology to map, assess, and achieve good condition of ecosystems so that they can deliver ecosystem services. And there are already technical guidelines for member states in preparation to really apply this EU methodology for mapping and assessing what is a good ecosystem condition. And of course, this methodology also covers the grasslands and also aims to cover the existing methodological gap, because its grasslands perhaps are not so well covered in the existing EU regulations and directives as some other ecosystems. And then much covered and much discussed carbon farming initiative, which accumulated with the adopted communication on sustainable carbon cycles at the end of last year. And it really also addresses these challenges related to carbon farming and aims to upscale this green business model. And there was also a related 2-year study and a technical handbook, but I hear, of course, from you here that there is still need to go much further. And there again, I think the research, as also underlined here, besides CAP, the research programs and restoration programs like LIFE are also key to make the change. And of course, you need funding, so it's also the national financing which should count. And here, just as we're talking about the research, we have research project, and we have now the new Horizon Europe program coming up, and it does under its cluster, which deals with environment, food, circular economy. It also states clearly that to achieve climate neutrality, we have to reduce GHG emissions, maintain natural carbon sinks, and enhance sequestration and storage of carbon in ecosystems, and doing by having more potential for nature-based solutions, and also having new production systems. And for instance, well, we have already now the first projects are about to sign grant agreements, but under the new work program for 2023-24, some of the topics that you will see coming up once the work program will be published is the assessment of the potential of carbon farming as possible future business for farmers and foresters, and also exploring carbon farming techniques and their outcomes, and costs, also analyzing costs of carbon farming management practices and revenue possibilities. And when we come to the other couple of other key strategies in the field, there is of course also the European bioeconomy strategy, which equally says that we should link the sustainable use of renewable biological resources with the protection and restoration of biodiversity, what we see again happening in Go Green project. And social, environmental, and economic sustainability and circularity are in the core of this strategy. So we're talking, of course, also the new jobs, new opportunities for the farmers to have more variety for the business and related income, and thus and improvement at the same time for the environment as well. And the bioeconomy strategy had a related action plan, and of course the same, it consists of 14 well-defined actions, as you here see on the right side as well. And I think several resound clearly with the work that Go Green Route is doing. And last but not least, of course, there is the Circular Economy Action Plan adopted in 2020, and it again emphasizes that circular economy should reduce pressure on natural resources, create sustainable jobs, and achieve climate neutrality target of 2050 and halt biodiversity loss. And that again, there are discussion about the making the sustainable products the norm in the EU, and also looking further into the standardization, into certification in this field, and that we should focus on the sectors that use the most resources. We can say here that the Go Green Routes, with, for instance, with the paper demos, is looking closely here, trying to also ensure there is less waste using the not so high quality grass. And of course, the circularity should work for people, regions, and cities. So yeah, I hope it didn't make it sound so simple after complicated discussions, but I think there is a long way ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pirette. And this is giving us a better idea of how these discussions around grasslands are actually anchored into the different strategies that are currently ongoing on an EU level. So this is now bringing us to the end of this webinar. Thank you everyone for having taken the time to join us. Before we leave, I would just like to give the floor to the team at AETB, so Sonia Germer and Muluken Adam Segit, who are actually coordinating this work behind our leader, Philip. So would you like to give some last remarks, each of you? Maybe we start with Sonia first and then Muluken.
Originally, we planned to start with Muluken, but it doesn't matter. Well, from the coordination side, I would like to thank everyone. It was a really great event. Something what caught my attention is that sometimes it's good to put things in a simple way so they are quite easy to understand. And that was a slide of straw shown by Uffe, who said that that is a missed opportunity of storing carbon if the landscape is not green. I think that was quite understandable. And the other one was the slide where Paul has shown how the land use change from cropland to grassland can store carbon not only for a short period, but for several decades. And I think that was a very important point. And looking to the future of GoGrass, well, we will have some demo visits still this year, and these are key events for us because they are essential for some work we are doing. For example, the assessment of demos, the creation of successful business models, and of course, the replication in European areas. And talking about replication, national replication workshops will be planned in Romania, Hungary, and Spain. And these include very different kind of stakeholders as company owners, support agency, farmers associations, and so on. And what is nice is that we can already see now that there is a very fruitful flow from knowledge from both, from the demos to the follower regions and vice versa. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the rest of the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Sona. Many points still to look forward to in GoGrass. Mulukan, would you like to say some concluding words for us?
Yes, Clara, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's really a great opportunity for me as well to learn more about what's going on and to hear from the different perspective. And in particular, I'm really, I see how a great opportunity of grass in terms of green carbon capture, and other benefit, including reduced soil erosion and reducing greenhouse gas emission, and also increasing biodiversity and other aspects as well. And above that, we have also observed really how much opportunities we have for valorizations of grass, in particular for in terms of technology and innovations, what, for instance, GoGrass project and Superg is working, and in particular in GoGrass projects, the 4 demos that we are developing, how important it is for valorizations of grass for further use in this aspect. So we'll have further new markets and opportunities for rural areas. That is, this innovation need to be commercialized. We need to develop an appropriate business models which fits basically the socio-economic, agroecology, and of course of the local areas, which help basically to revitalize rural areas in the EU, and this will have further spillover effects in rural areas. And above that, what's also fascinating is also we need to develop a suitable business environment. So it's this suitable business environment which helps basically the various stakeholders along the value chain. We have the biomass producers, let's say the raw material. We need to develop the technologies. There is a production process, and of course the marketing strategy. So we need to develop this suitable business environment which serves the various stakeholders. And this aspect, so the activities that we have is rather a multi-actor coordination and engagement with various actors, including policymakers, the scientific communities, farmers, and of course entrepreneurs who are using those technologies to produce a suitable business model. So this was really quite interesting for me to see how we are working in GoGrass project. So if in terms of the next step within the GoGrass project, the white paper is already mentioned, but still we have a policy brief. We are using the different results from the white paper and other results from the GoGrass project. We are developing basically to write a policy brief, and we are also working on the various tools which will help us basically in terms of activities that I already mentioned earlier. So this will be really quite really fascinating and motivating for us to develop further on those tools, which basically help us to support the development of business cases and business models within the demos and other follower countries within the GoGrass project and beyond. So thank you everyone from my side as well.
Thank you, Mulukan, for these last words. So thank you everyone again for joining us. We're very glad you were able to make it today. You will still have access to the different recordings and material that will be, on the one hand, published on the YouTube channel of GoGrass, which has been sent by Elisa from Greenovate Europe in the chat. You will also receive by email all the material from today's workshop. And you will also receive a little evaluation from Greenovate in the coming days, which you can use to provide us with feedback. And this will also help us improve future events and make sure they remain as tailored as possible to your needs. Thank you, everyone. And I wish you all a nice evening and a nice rest of the week.